think about when you're applying for a job, for example. The common advice is you might modify your resume for the job. And so the same is true when you're pitching to investors, right? You're always going to have to change your pitch just a little bit so that it suits that audience. And then you always have to remember, like, investors, they have their own motivations, right? If you're talking to an angel investor who's investing their own money, they're going to be motivated a certain way. If you're talking to VCs who are investing other people's money, they're going to be motivated in different ways as well.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, investor, lawyer, or even an engineer, knowing how to tell your story can be critical to your success. Having worked in all these professions at one point in his life, Peter Socarras firmly believed this, and he can attest to it. From patent attorney to vice president and deputy general counsel at Nevro, Peter's multifaceted career trajectory has had one common denominator: a dedication to the life sciences. In addition to his leadership roles at the medical device company Nevro, Peter now works as an angel investor. His focus is investing in early-stage health tech companies that bring the decision-making to the patient. In this episode, Peter shows how making meaningful contributions to the life science space starts with asking yourself why your technology matters. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining me on the rainy day. And I'm sure by the time we publish your podcast, it will be sunny, that the rain has gone by. But I can't believe how much rain we got this year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so I always like to start with our listeners a little bit about your background, how you chose this path of your career, and did you ever envision that this is where you want to be?
Sure. So I've dedicated the last 20 plus years of my life to the life science space. First as an engineer, then as a patent agent, patent attorney. I'm currently the vice president and deputy general counsel and assistant corporate secretary at Nevro. I'm sure we'll get into that. But most recently, I've also been, I joined Life Science Angels and have been doing some angel investing as I look to continue to expand kind of my reach in the space. But I think my story really starts with sort of my family upbringing. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. My parents were Cuban immigrant. They immigrated from Cuba in their teenage years and met in Miami, Florida. And that has a lot to do with sort of my background and kind of where I've come to. You know, a lot of early learnings from my family, and I'm sure we can get into all of those stories. Did I ever want to do something outside of the life science space? That's an interesting discussion. My dad was a doctor, and he always kind of pushed me in that direction. So I think there was a little bit of nudging into that space, but I don't think I had the chops to ever be a doctor. So my career's taken different paths over the years.
I find there's many people who are becoming a patent attorney. Oftentimes they have a background on the technical background. And what prompted you to think, like, this is the route that I want to be practicing law rather than the technical aspect?
Well, a lot of patent attorneys have the same experience that I have, where some of it is just by accident and some of it is just by serendipity. And a little bit of that was my history. I was working as a graduate student at the University of Miami, working actually on a program for testing heart rate variability at a trauma center. but I was not happy to be working at a trauma center. It was not right for me. And I happened to meet one of the lead attorneys at Cordis Neurovascular down there in Miami, Florida. He was a patent attorney back there. And to be 100% frank, I didn't know the first thing about patent law back then. But it was soon after September 11th. It was very difficult to find a job back then in the economy back then. And he said to me, "Look, Peter, if you know how to write, I can teach you the ropes. I can teach you patent law. Come on in." And I took a chance. And I joined Cordis as really as an intern at that point. But with the patent law, you can take the patent exam and become a patent agent and work as an agent without having to go to law school first. So I did that. That's how I sort of started my career. And it was really pretty amazing to dive into kind of the strategy of it all. That's the first thing that just kind of made me fall in love with the practice. Also the variety, the opportunity to just engage in many different types of technologies, and you're working with one thing one day and another the next. But he really pushed me to leave Miami, Florida, because at that time, the industry was sort of leaving Miami. I know Miami's really become kind of a hotbed these days and is doing really well. But back then, he was really kind of pushing me, urging me to go and get trained at more of the sort of legal hubs, New York, Washington, D.C., what have you. And so I got into GW, George Washington University Law School. And I eventually landed at a law firm out there in what they had what's called the student associate program. So I worked full time, and I went to law school at night. So it took me a little bit longer than traditional law school path, but I got a chance to really get an incredible amount of experience through that process. I did both patent prosecution and patent litigation at that time, and that really gave me an opportunity to learn a ton about sort of the strategy of the business, and lessons that I live with through this day.
What was the strategy of the business that you learned that you still use till these days?
So I think one of the things that really benefited me was from the opportunity to have experience not just in prosecuting patents to basically obtain them, but in litigating them, and also to litigate across industries, which was really unique. In doing that, I started to learn kind of some of the universal things about the practice that, like I say, I live with to these days. I think the most important of which is telling a story. The little secret about patent law that I'll share with you and listeners today, it's a law that has been developed with the ideal of trying to be objective. There's this ideal and there's this attempt in the law to say, okay, if you do A, B, and C, you're on your way to being able to protect this technology. The reality is the decisions in the space are based on patent examiners at the patent office, then patent judges, judges and juries in district courts, and judges at the appellate courts. The reality is that this objective ideal is played out through subjectivity in human beings. And so being able to tell a story, being able to actually touch human beings with your technology, with your development, why does it matter? Why should they care? Why should they be listening? All of those things I think are super critical when it comes to being successful in this space. And I think it's been a huge driver for success at Nebro, for example.
At least my thought, my idea is that when you read a patent, it's always very dry language, and it's very boring to read. If it's not meant to be like a storytelling to get. So when do you say that? Like, what part is it that the importance of storytelling is important?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you the example of the Nevro story as an example. So spinal cord stimulation goes back decades, and Nevro's in the spinal cord stimulation space for the treatment of chronic pain. And classic spinal cord stimulation delivered pulses into the spinal cord at what's called low frequency, so 40 to 50, 60 hertz, with the idea of generating this thing called paresthesia, which is like a tingling sensation and white noise to the brain that would often mask the area of pain. So if you had pain in your left hip, you'd cover that area of pain with that paresthesia, that tingling sensation. And it had the effect of sort of blocking the brain or confusing the brain so that you didn't feel pain. Konstantinos Zalataris, the founder of Nevro, asked the question, what if instead of delivering this at 40, 50, 60 hertz, what if you delivered it at 10,000 hertz, orders of magnitude greater? What happens? Well, some of the original thought leaders in this space said, well, you can't do that. There's all sorts of unintended consequences. You can't go there. You can't go to those frequency levels. Well, he said, I'm going to try it. He was a true maverick in this space. He was an outsider from the spinal cord stimulation space. And he said, let's give it a go. The result of which is a fascinating kind of moment in this company's history. The very first patient, she had an old device implanted, and we unplug her device and we plug in the Nevro device. And her first reaction was, sorry guys, your device doesn't work. I don't feel the tingling sensation. Go back to the drawing board. And after a lot of back and forth, we stop and finally somebody asked her, man, but how's your pain? And she sort of freezes in her tracks and she says, wait a second, I don't feel tingling and I don't feel pain. You know, this is a remarkable moment. And this plays out with a lot of those first patients. You know, you hear stories about whatever this takes, don't take it out of me. Please give me 10 more minutes. I feel normal. It's really an incredible story. Now, if you take that story and you're just really dry and objective, then you're just saying, well, everybody always say, did you just turn the dial to 11? Did you just turn up turn the dial on the frequency and that's it? Well, no, when you see how this all plays out, when you see how the entire industry, you know, you had three dominant players in the market, Boston Scientific, Medtronic, and at that time, St. Jude, now Abbott, all delivering the same tried and true kind of paresthesia-based therapy. And then all of a sudden you get this startup that is doing it orders of magnitude different. There's a story to tell there, right? And so going to the patent office, you tell the story and people kind of understand, wow, this is a solution to pain, to chronic pain. Think about it when we're sitting in a society with massive opioid problems, and you're probably on the precipice of solving chronic pain. That's something important, and people listen. And we've dealt with years and years of litigation against our fiercest of competitors, and we've had to tell this story over and over again to judges at the patent office, judges in the court, and at the appellate level. And I think it really resonates at every level when people see how this technology helps the individual. So going back to your question, that's where your patent attorneys kind of do their best, is by finding that story to tell, that story to weave in, and not just having a very dry process, a dry document that sort of what you're saying is kind of boring at the end of the day.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So when you're saying when you're having the litigation, when you have competitors, probably thinks that you don't have the right to use the technology because they own the patent, etc., etc. And then the story that you just shared with me to show the efficacy of the product, is that what swayed the judge?
A big part of it, a big part of our ability to tell a story. First of all, it starts with just getting people's attention, right? Just getting people to recognize that it's important. And then part of the story goes to, well, why is this different? Why is this having a meaningful impact on patients' lives? I think of the life science space, and this is true for whether we're talking about patents or whether we're talking about raising investments or hiring a team, is that ability to really get people to understand kind of what you're doing, how you're impacting people's lives, and how you're sort of making things better for patients. I think it's really important all around. And so that's one of the things I've really appreciated from a career perspective, being in the life science space, is that ability to, or that connection to purpose. I think is really meaningful for many reasons.
So I think many people, when they think about a patent attorney doing the IP, is to make sure that your IP protected and you represent the company. You need to litigate others who infringe on your patent, or defend the company when other things that you infringe on that patent. And you mentioned that your role now is like the Deputy General Counsel. What does it entail when it's, I guess, I'm just trying to share with the listeners, like when you're a lawyer in the company, what is the role of the lawyer in the company besides protecting the company from being sued?
Sure. So maybe it's worth talking about a company in terms of its evolution, right? So I joined Nevro just right after its Series B fundraise, and so I was the first and only in-house counsel for a while, and kind of led the team for many years through a Series C finance raise, a debt financing raise, finally an IPO, and some secondary offerings. And depending on where a company is during its evolution, its purpose and what it's trying to drive out of its IP strategy will always be different, right? So in the beginning days, it was all about capital raising, right? So why it benefits an organization to have an in-house counsel thinking through these issues is I got to sort of live and breathe every day the story and the strategy of the organization. And I was able to really kind of connect with what our objectives was to try to accomplish, as opposed to just kind of the dry legal function of getting a patent, right? So knowing, for example, that our objective was capital raising, I knew exactly how we needed to position the company, how we needed to present ourselves to investors, so that we could say, okay, this is our strategy. This is why we're going to be successful in the long term, and this is why this is a worthy investment, right? So you go from that stage, you go through your IPO, then we had a commercial launch. So now we're in the market, and then IP becomes actually part of the company's reputation, right? It was absolutely critical for us to have an exclusive offering, to break into the market with something different. Christine, you'd have to tell me if you know of a different example, but a medical device startup to break into a market that had the three biggest players, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and now Abbott, and we're up to plus or minus a percentage point here or there, up to about 20% market share. It's a really unique story. It's a really I don't know of any other company that has had that success. And that was based in part on our ability to have an exclusive offering and our ability to really base our reputation on that exclusive offering, show the data. We have an incredible library of clinical data showing that this is better for patients. So we leverage both the clinical data and the exclusivity offering to break into the marketplace. And then you have sort of the fast followers that, then you get into litigation. And we've had to litigate against at least three of our competitors that have come into the space trying to infringe our core technology. We've also leveraged some other technology for ability to monetize our IP, the non-core IP. We were able to monetize that against one competitor, and in these difficult times where cash is king, that helps the balance sheet. So we've used IP all along the evolution of the company in really strategic ways.
You mentioned earlier about telling the story about the asset that you have with your IP. Thinking about a lot of the listeners who are early stage company, they have an IP, they need to raise money, and I've seen a lot of time when company present, they would say like, this is how big the market is, the opportunity, the potential exit, and then they have one pager on the IP, and then they just list the IP, the patent numbers or pending patent numbers, and then just move on to the next.
Yeah.
What do you have suggestion in terms of especially when you're at the early stage? Those are your big asset in addition to your team. How do you tell the story so that becomes stronger?
So, Christine, I see that all the time, and I would advise a different direction. So the way that I like to think about this is, for a seed stage organization, there's always 3 or 4 true pillars of success, and 3 or 4 key aspects of the business that are going to make it successful, that are going to allow it to raise follow-on capital. And, IP is always one of those. So I think it needs to be interwoven. You need to figure out what are your 3 or 4 kind of pillars of success, whether it's a clinical trial strategy, whether it's a go-to-market strategy. How does that interweave with IP? And then you want to present them sort of all together in a cohesive story, not as an afterthought, not as a last minute slide. So what does that mean kind of more tactically? If your critical component, your critical kind of commercial differentiator is, let's say for us, it's paresthesia-free therapy. You want to talk about how your IP strategy covers that commercial differentiator, right? So then you're talking about both. This is why people are going to buy this product. This is why it's protected. This is our clinical path to get that labeling. And then you're talking about 3 key pillars there that tell the investor, okay, this is why this organization is going to be successful. The other thing that presentation does is it shows investors the level of sophistication in the entrepreneur. You're showing that you know what's important. You're showing that you have sort of a focus on what's going to make a company successful, and you want to be presenting that. You want to be presenting yourself as sophisticated and a leader that knows how to focus an organization. Now, a lot of startups will tell you, what, I just don't have the funds for it. Understood. There's always that balancing act of resources. Resources are always limited, but to be able to at least have a strategy with regards to what you're going to do and how you're going to proceed maybe after you get a capital raise. I think that that's really important to share with investors as well.
Is this something that oftentimes the founders, they don't have the patent? They're not lawyers. They probably filed a patent licensing it from the university. And what do you advise them to do to come up with a strategy that cohesive with the story that they want to tell in order to help them raise the money?
Yeah, the one thing that I think best serves entrepreneurs is to recognize the ecosystem that they're in. People have gone through these issues before, and there's an incredible amount of free help by way of mentors, advisors, friends and other colleagues that have kind of been through the process before. Organizations like yours, for example, providing kind of coaching and help. So to talk to people who have gone through the process before and talk to them about sort of what sort of mistakes have they made when presenting, what sort of things have they learned when presenting. I think that that's a huge resource, because in those conversations, and every time you talk to somebody, I'm not talking about the particulars about the technology, but what I'm talking about is how do I strategize about how I build my startup, and how do I strategize about how do I present myself to investors and VCs. Every time you say that story, every time you give your elevator pitch, you refine it just a little bit more, and you give the story just a little bit better, and you refine your strategy just a little bit better. And so I think that that's one thing that I think entrepreneurs really should take advantage of, is the network in the ecosystem. And just, I've always been so happy to see how many people in the ecosystem want to help others. I think we're all in it to really kind of advance the life science space for patients. And so you get a lot of free help. You get a lot of free advice out there.
So now you mentioned that you are an angel investors, and assume that would be early stage companies. Can you tell me more about what kind of companies, and what are the most common pitfall that you saw when you meet early stage company that you wish they knew, or something that you feel like you can coach them?
Yeah. So I'll start kind of in my journey as I've picked up angel investing. I think, and I've been kind of working through different theses and trying to land somewhere, but I think what really prompted me to start was just a recognition, or just a question actually that I'm asking myself. As we see big tech kind of laying off tons and tons of engineers and putting a lot of talent out into the talent pool, as we see kind of a generation of folks being more purpose driven, is life science about to go into a golden era where AI is finally there? Is virtual reality or augmented reality? We've been hearing about these technologies for years, but are we finally at a tipping point where it can make a meaningful difference to technology coming to patients, to drug discovery and the like? So I've been looking at those sorts of opportunities, whether there's AI-driven companies looking for drug discovery, where there's just sort of better solutions for use of healthcare data, the expansion of health tech, right, is now finally that tipping point where we're giving the patient so much power in their iPhones and in their smartphones to really make a difference for their treatment pathway. So I've been listening to a lot of pitches. If you ask me kind of some of the pitfalls and the advice that I'd give to entrepreneurs, one thing is really, really knowing your audience, understanding is this investor that I'm talking to, is this group of investors that I'm talking to, are they more focused on the data and the science, or are they more focused on the clinical pathway, or are they more focused on the go-to-market strategy? And whatever it is, you really need to get to that point and present that idea. So to give you a couple of examples, obviously not naming any names, but I've seen a handful of times where I've been in a group that gets presented, and the group will say, well, we didn't even see the data. There was no data. And the entrepreneurs, the company, they had data. They just didn't present it in that 30 minutes that they had to give their pitch, right? And because they were focused on something else, they were focused on a go-to-market strategy, or they were focused on something else, and they didn't present to that investor group what that investor group really cared about, right? Go-to-market strategy is another example. Seed stage companies might come out and present on their go-to-market strategy, but the investors that they're talking to, and I've been in these groups and had talks about it afterwards, it's like, no, they're way too early to even be thinking about go-to-market. Really, what we're thinking about is what's their funding strategy. So I think that's really important is for the entrepreneurs to maybe ask a lot of questions in advance of any time that they're about to do a pitch, to kind of know what their audience is, know what their audience is looking for, so that they can hit those points, and that they don't turn off the investors by not giving them something that they want.
I think you're right, because I think it's almost like a Goldilocks. I think you hear stories about, like, well, I present data, and then they say, like, this is too much information. I'm not interested in the data. I want to know how are you going to get to the market, and because that's what they know. And sometimes it can be very frustrating if you're an entrepreneur, is that everybody push you to different direction. People who care about the data say, oh, you have to present the data. People who care about the go-to-market strategy say, like, I want to see that. So are you suggesting that company, when they present to you, is to have the conversation with you so that they have some idea what kind of thing that you care the most, and then go from there rather than go start with their pitch?
Yeah, I think that's the best path. If you have an opportunity to learn who your investors are before you pitch, I think it's critical. And it could be just a few questions. What would you like to see? You could present to an investor an outline. These are the things I'm able to present to you. What is the most important thing for you, right? Those few questions that you ask in advance, I think, would go a real long way. And this is true. Think about when you're applying for a job, for example. The common advice is you might modify your resume for the job. And so the same is true when you're pitching to investors, right? You're always going to have to change your pitch just a little bit so that it suits that audience. And then you always have to remember, like, investors, they have their own motivations, right? If you're talking to an angel investor who's investing their own money, they're going to be motivated a certain way. If you're talking to VCs who are investing other people's money, they're going to be motivated in different ways as well. And that those motivations even may change depending on what fund they're investing out of, or what time during the fund they're investing. So there's all sorts of kind of moving pieces, and you really need to adapt to those moving pieces.
So my next question, well, in case some of the company are interested in pitching to you, what are your motivation? What are you interested in?
Yeah, I think so. So for me personally, I want to know that there's a funding strategy, and I want sort of clarity and sophistication around how are you going to get to those are you going to get to those next levels? So I think that that's really important because particularly during these days, there's a lot of risk, sort of capital follow-on risk that these organizations are coming through. So that's one, but maybe more basic to me is I want to hear that the problem that they're trying to solve is a real problem. It's not just a sort of a technology play. They didn't develop a technology and are now looking for a problem to apply it to. The founders are addressing a real problem. Maybe they have a personal experience with that problem. Those to me are always the ideal founders because there's going to be sort of that personal drive and motivation for success. And then in the life science space, and this, Christine, this is just me. You talk to 10 different people, they'll give you 10 different answers to this question. In the life science space, so often you don't see founders take things all the way to commercialization. So what I want to know is sort of a founder group that can at least take it through Series B is how I think about these things. Can that founder group successfully reach the milestones necessary to get to Series B? And my experience has been sometimes around that Series B stage, you often see the VCs at that stage step in and insert kind of a fuller team, whether it's replacing a CEO or just adding additional resources to that sitting CEO to help the organization. So I want to know that founder team can get to Series B with the passion for solving this a true problem.
And so, what are usually the data point that you need or that you can gather if the founder team has what it takes to get to the Series B?
Yeah, that's look. History is great, right? If founders have done it before, that's always fantastic. The problem with that approach is that you start to get sort of the homogeneity in repeat entrepreneurs, right? So I think as investors, we really need to look past that approach of just depending on history, depending on whether they've done it before. So then the next thing that I turn to is, do you find that grit in the person? What's that person's sort of life story? Can they show that they sort of have the grit and determination to do it? And then can they learn from others, right? Are they acceptable to coaching? Can they be coached? Can they be taught by others, right? So maybe a different way of saying is a combination of grit and humility at the same time, right? To be able to persevere, but to also know that maybe they don't know all the answers. And they can reach out for help and get help from other folks, because those are the people who are going to be successful in doing it for the first time, right? Somebody who has sort of those characteristic traits, I think are important in order to do it for a first time.
Last question, but what are the areas in life science that you're interested in investing?
Yeah, so I think I've been looking at a lot of health tech opportunities that kind of bring the decision making to the patient, right? How can we give data to the patient to help them own their care a little bit more, right? How can we facilitate giving the patient data so that they can better use the healthcare services? I think that's really important, particularly when we have such a high demand on the health system. For individuals to help themselves as much as possible, I think it's really important. And then along those same lines, technology, AI that can help doctors make better decisions, whether it's in diagnostics or choosing the right therapies. I think that those tools are going to help the system kind of be more efficient and be able to help bring better healthcare across broader pools of people.
That's great. Well, we're short on time, but thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insight and your interest in investing, and I really enjoy our conversation.
Yeah, Christine, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.